Okay, so you've gotten to know the climate in the real estate market you're planning on investing in. You've figured out your financing and the ways you're going to make that real estate climate work for you. So now it's time to compare individual deals and run the numbers. And a pro forma is the best way to evaluate the numbers of individual deals within a market. I'll share my screen with you now, and we can start to run through some pro formas, how to use them, and the kind of information that you're going to gather no matter which type of pro forma template you're going to use. Keep in mind that running the numbers is going to require a program that you use regularly. The same template. You're going to want to save it and re-reference it in the future. Now we'll break this one down and run through it, but keep in mind sometimes there's going to be some quick glance tactics that you'll use in the beginning so that you don't have to go through the whole pro forma process. But from there, your pro forma will start as a draft and then move into a more and more better refined version as you get more information at your disposal to plug into it. So let's go through a pro forma. Starting at the bottom line, since the bottom line is where investors usually really start to make their decision, and because this part all calculates for you, we look at the performance stats or the metrics that you use to evaluate real estate investments. You'll see some names, the gross rent multiplier, and the numbers that correspond to the deal that we'll look at. Also in the middle here is the formula that's used to calculate gross rent multiplier. It's a price over potential rents ratio, and it generates a number. It's very similar to the 1% rule. Cash on cash return on investment, very commonly referenced and used. And cap rate is another one I'd really like to focus on today, including cap rate after rehab, once you know what your initial repair budget is going to be. But again, these stats are going to automatically calculate and plug in. And as you get through the pro forma, you'll get to see all the factors that go into them. So cap rate and gross rent multiplier both relate back to the purchase price. The cap rate formula is net operating income over purchase price. Net operating income, and therefore cap rate, is pretty intuitive, except that it does not include debt service. Also, if there's rehab work in the very beginning, you're not necessarily going to include that in your annual expenses either. So that'll go at the top. The good thing about cap rate is it's not affected by changes in interest rates. So it allows you to look at deals through the same set of eyes, whether you're working with cash or a loan. It also doesn't change every time there's a fluctuation in interest rates. So you can have a good feel for what deals are doing over time. Right now in our market, cap rates have been hovering around 5%. Now with the gross rent multiplier, the lower the number, the better. When you take the purchase price and divide it by the gross rents, if that number were to be 100, then for annual rents, or 10 for monthly rents, it's going to be the same as hitting the 1% rule, if that's a formula you've heard of. Some people use that one where they look at the purchase price, and if the rents are 1% of the purchase price, then move on and evaluate the deal. So for the 1% rule, a $100,000 property would generate $1,000 a month in rents, and that's pretty hard to find in our market these days. Now, moving up a little in the pro forma, but still in the metrics section, let's look at some of the main returns. Above the performance stats, you'll see the net operating income, which is income less expenses. And then you'll see a few of those other items plugged in to create cash flow. Those other items are going to be your annual principal and interest payment. So that's where your debt service goes. And your capital reserves per year. Once you factor those items in, you get your net cash flow, and that's what's going to create your cash on cash return on investment. On top of the cash on cash return on investment, you can calculate, or the pro forma calculates for you, how that goes up once you add your loan pay down. And if you factor in a 3% appreciation, that's when the numbers really start getting good. So defining the metrics, besides just looking at the bottom of our pro forma spreadsheet, net operating income and cap rate don't include debt service. NOI is income less annual operating expenses. Cash flow comes in after you subtract debt service and the capital expenses. And then your cash on cash return on investment is calculated by the net cash flow as it compares to or divided by the total cash that you invested in the property. And that'll be your cash on cash return on investment. Information that we get our hands on often starts in the form of an MLS listing or a real rough sketch of what a deal is going to look like. And therefore, that's how our Proforma starts as well. It starts as a rough estimate, and it gets more and more refined as you delve in deeper, or as you start to receive the financial history, such as an operating statement, a P&L, and you want a year-to-date and a previous year's P&L. And then it gets refined again once you walk the property and do a home inspection. And this often comes after the financial analysis when we're dealing with occupied rental properties. Usually that walkthrough doesn't happen until you've already become comfortable with the numbers. If the numbers work, then proceed. So it starts off at a game as if yes, then proceed. If the quick and dirty rough estimates look okay, then proceed. So going to the very top of the pro forma with the information we're going to plug in first you need to know the price and the loan details. You can estimate immediate rehab needs, and sometimes that's a complete napkin number. Other times, if it says fixer, you know that there's going to be at least $20,000 worth of work, and you can throw that number in there until you start to really identify where it's going to go. But in any event, you start with the loan and price details, maybe some immediate rehab needs, and then you plan to refine that estimate with the walkthrough and the inspection. In a good pro forma, there's places you can plug that in. So you've got your price that goes right here at the top. Loan terms are all right here. And then initial needs, capital rehab goes here. And then again, a good pro forma is going to have your total investment, cash you need to bring to the closing table outlined for you as well. So right now our example is an 8-plex in historic North Boise that will probably be listed soon, and it's got some initial numbers in them. They're not perfectly refined. It's still a draft. And this deal would require just under $400,000, just over $400,000 to access. What information do you need to gather? Well, of course, you need to know the income. What are the rents? And I like to look at the market rents as well as the current actual rents that they're receiving today, and of course, any other income. It's important to consider whether the market rents are yours and something that you've already vetted with the property manager, or if they could potentially be pie in the sky seller numbers that are unvetted. It's reasonable to take a look at where those rents are going to go, but I like to see both, how it performs on today's rents and tomorrow's. The vacancy rate is a number, like several numbers in here, that I like to keep consistent and conservative. So rarely do I move it from 3 or 4%, which has been below the actual vacancy amount in this area, vacancy rate in this area for some time. With recent economic uncertainties, I bumped it up to 4% to add a little bit of a more conservative nature, but I still run it at 3%. In any event, I don't change it much, and I keep it consistent. We glean our annual income, and then we move into expenses. Expenses are going to include your landlord paid utilities, annual cleaning, maintenance, repairs and maintenance, and then exterior landscape and gardening, property management, property taxes, insurance, and homeowners association dues and fees. Things that are excluded that you may end up spending might be your annual CPA tax filing fees, and of course the income tax benefits you may receive, or taxes on income, any impacts from holding real estate. Of course, your property taxes are included. So you're going to have all these expenses where you can plug them in and they'll add up for you. And maybe it starts as an estimation, maybe gets refined later. But in any event, all of these expenses mentioned above are going to give you your total operating expenses. Total income less total operating expenses gives you your NOI, your net operating income. And that number is used for several formulas in the performance stats at the end, which calculate for you. So moving on back down to cash flow, we've established our net operating income, and our capital needs and immediate capital improvement needs went way at the top with our initial cash requirements, but also it's good to have some capital reserves per year budgeted in. Not every expense is going to be an annual expense that's predictable like utilities, but it is still indeed something you can predict that capital needs will arise. And so you plug that in below the NOI and above the cash flow. Here you also factor in your annual costs of the loan, which would be your annual principal and interest cost. And that gives you your net cash flow by year, and sometimes I like to have it by month as well. So as you're going through this process to plug in the numbers, gather all the information, do the due diligence, there's some questions it's good to remember to ask. One, is any information not included on the expense history or the P&L? In theory, you get it from a management company, but is there some utility that the owner is still paying? A lot of times the mortgage payment, the principal and interest payment may not show up. You'll plug in taxes and insurance on your own, that's not a problem, but are there any major repairs that weren't showing? And again, to stress the importance of a team, you should have an agent who can help you run these numbers, help run the Proforma, know that the metrics and performance stats that you get at the end, where they sit compared to what other deals have been recently. And you can rely on your agent to also help you analyze the HOA. It's good to request their financials if it's in an association to make sure the HOA is funded and doesn't have any major capital needs coming up that it doesn't have balance for, which could result in a large special assessment. Preventing surprises is always a good idea, and this is the stage, this Proforma evaluation stage is the time to get into that level of detail. So any known upcoming capital needs at the property or at the HOA? And if at the HOA, does the HOA have the money to handle it? Again, if you're using the seller's market rents, research whether they're realistic or pie in the sky, and bring in your property manager at this juncture as well to make sure they get eyes on the property and can help make any adjustments to performance expectations. So the quick glance tactics that you may impart once you first see a property might be comparing your purchase price to rents, running a quick GRM, that gross rent multiplier, or even using the 1% rule. Although I would say in this market, distance from it, because we're not hitting that rents are not 1% of the purchase price. You're going to look at whether the rents are realistic. And if you're using market rents as well, making sure those are realistic as well, and in an amount of time that's comfortable for you to plan to budget to stabilize and to get them to be at that actual level. When you estimate the expenses, you can use some rules of thumb. I usually just plug in numbers into the Proforma since it gives me so much data and I can just run a cap. And so I'll oftentimes start by just throwing numbers into my Proforma template based on previous properties. But some other things you could do would be maybe estimate a percentage, say 35 or 40% on expenses. Or you could do for a newer property, $3,200 to $3,400 per unit per year. And if it's an older property that's standard, $4,000 to $4,200 per unit per year. Things like common heat that you'll find in some of the older properties, one heat source, like in the example we're using, that'll affect it. Or if there's a short-term rental in there, those expenses will be higher as well. But you do want to have a consistent baseline for your expenses for similar properties when you're running the initial Proformas before you plug in the real details. So keep your vacancy rate consistent, your initial estimates. A lot of times I'll use $500 per unit per year on repairs, and landscape, I'll use a rough number depending on who maintains the landscape. But then you can note the metrics that you've gotten in the performance stats section in previous performance you've run. And you can reference how this new property stacks up, and you'll start to see it coming into shape long before you ever need to step inside a unit. So here's what the Proforma looks like as a whole. You'll see at the top we have the price, loan, and cash requirements section with the loan amount here, your purchase price, and then your initial capital budget, and then it'll give you the total cash needed to purchase. In this particular 8-plex example, you've got 8 different units. There's some market rents estimated and the estimated square feet, but also you have your actual rents estimated. The vacancy figure is my standard that's plugged in, and then that gives the total income for you. Moving on down to all those expenses we discussed, pretty standard. In this particular property, there is a short-term rental, so there's a Wi-Fi expense on there. And you've got your utilities, your maintenance, exterior maintenance, cleaning, repairs, and maintenance, short-term maintenance. HOA doesn't exist, so there's no number there. Taxes, insurance, and property management is 8%. And together, all these expenses add up to a total of just about $36,000. That would have fit in pretty close to that per unit per year estimate for an older property, plus a little bit because of the short-term rental. And income less expenses equals net operating income. Subtract the principal and interest payment for a year's worth of time, which is calculated automatically for you. If you're going to budget a capital reserves per year, you would factor that in here. And then voila, you get your net cash flow and all of those formulas we ran through at the beginning. Your gross rent multiplier here is 141. For the north end, 150,000 per unit, a 141 gross rent multiplier is really not bad. And it translates into a 3% cash flow until you factor in your loan pay down, it goes to 7.1%. And then of course, add in just a little appreciation on top of that, a conservative amount of 3%, which we have plugged into the standards at the top, and I never even touch it. You suddenly end up with a 15% return on investment. The cap rate on this one is a little bit above market, above that 5% mark, just about a little bit. And there probably would be some rehab needs a new buyer would take on. And so once those numbers are plugged in and identified, then that cap rate after rehab number would go down a little bit. And that'll allow you to compare it with properties that don't need any rehab work. So you don't get excited about the lower price of a property that needs work, but then after you add in all your repairs, you realize your cap rate is not any better. The other reason cap rate is good is because it is the great equalizer. So if you're paying cash, if you're getting a loan, you can consistently see what your return is and kind of watch that number through time as it changes. And in our market, the cap rate has been trying to push down a little bit, but it has been hovering around 5% for quite some time. And the increase in rents alongside those increased purchase prices have been helping keep it consistent. So hopefully this helps you learn how to run the numbers and evaluate a property. There's an online calculator. I don't love all of the things about it. It throws everything into a percentage, but the Bigger Pockets website has an online cash flow calculator, and the link is here. And then there's a link to the Boise Investment Properties.net website, which is a great site and resource for watching investment properties that currently are on the market. And then, of course, our brokerage, the Swope Investment Properties website /avid-investors is a way to request more information if you are interested in learning this kind of investing information regularly. There is an investor club that you could attend, and we'll do hopefully helpful and informative presentations like these to keep you up to speed on the market, up to speed on running your numbers, and figuring out, of course, how to apply that market to your overall investment strategy. Again, I'm Stacy McBain. Thank you so much for your participation and happy investing.